welcome. I'm Frances Vasquez. I am chair of the Grant County Democratic Party, and we're so happy to help host this evening. We are in partnership with WNMU to host this forum on a very contemporary issue. We welcome you. Our moderator this evening is Dr. Allison Evans. She is a professor of political science here at WNMU. And after the forum, please join us for some refreshments and to continue our dialogue. Welcome.
Hello, welcome everybody. I'm so happy that so many people could come out on such a hot day. At least we have air conditioning. So I'm very pleased to have three excellent panelists. You're really in for a treat. I'll introduce everybody first in turn and then let them take about 10 minutes to talk. So first we have Javier Murillo, who is a U.S. Border Patrol agent. He's actually in the Intelligence Department, so I'm sure he has a very interesting perspective. Next is Edna Reyes, who is actually an alumna of WNMU. She's from Deming and is now a second-year law student at Washburn University. And last but not least is Francesca Esteves, who is our district attorney. She serves Grant, Luna, and Hidalgo counties. So I'll turn it over to Javier.
Alrighty. Again, my name is Javier Murillo. I work here in Lordsburg, New Mexico, Border Patrol Station. I've been there for approximately 7 years. Just a little bit over 7 years. I hit it here in May. We live here in Silver City in Tyrone, my wife and kids. Just a little bit introduction, in reference to the Border Patrol and what we're doing here in Lordsburg and across the U.S.-Mexico border and the U.S.-Canada border. For the most part, again, we have approximately about 16,000 agents right now within the Border Patrol. Spread out across, again, the southwest border, southern Texas, and the northern border. Of course, the southern border is probably the most affected with illegal immigration and narcotics smuggling, and also the biggest area for any terrorist threats in reference to what we do out here. Again, more specifically speaking about what we do here in Grant County and Hidalgo County, and what affects this area for the most part is a lot of narcotic smuggling that occurs in the Boot Hill of New Mexico. Right now, our station is part of the El Paso sector. We're the only station and Deming as well assigned to El Paso sector, and again, we face that specific threat in reference to narcotics and alien undocumented smuggling there at the border, to include also human trafficking. One of the biggest things is trying to kind of explain what immigration, the smuggling part, the trafficking and the human smuggling and the human trafficking part. Human smuggling is in reference to where these transnational criminal organizations are bringing in undocumented subjects for work for the most part, and bringing them further into the nation, to specific locations that they're going to. Pretty much they obviously make money out of it. Now the trafficking is a part where they're specifically bringing these individuals into the United States for to exploit them in reference to children, young women, exploiting them either for prostitution, for to get them working at certain places where they're held, so to speak, as slaves, for lack of a better word. And that's how you kind of define both one from the other. Now, the narcotic smuggling is probably the biggest part that we face here in Blue Hill. Right now, we're I believe there at our station, our statistics are showing approximately 16,000 pounds of marijuana so far for the fiscal year that has been seized there in Hidalgo County. You know, it's on a daily basis that we're dealing with this specific threat. And you know, how it works for the most part, for y'all that don't know, you know, these individuals will pretty much bring narcotics, bundles of narcotics, 50-pound sacks into the United States and walk from the U.S.-Mexico border, you know, along the Boot Hill, approximately 65 miles towards Interstate 10, which is pretty much where they load out, and then from there they go north and transport those narcotics, for the most part marijuana, out either towards Phoenix or Albuquerque, New Mexico. You know, this little journey they take, you know, takes them approximately 10 days, 10 to 15 days, just depending on you know how quick they can get up there. And you know, our job is to intercept them, you know, at the borders if we can, and not trying to work that traffic as it moves, you know, north. And we've been pretty successful at that. You know, we face other threats at the border. You know, vehicle incursions, which consists of load vehicles that are either loaded with undocumented subjects or narcotics, where they try and make entry at these points other than the port of entry, and so they'll bring them in. And again, we're out there trying to deter or apprehend those who do make entry at you know, there along the border. One of the things that I kind of wanted to touch on, and I didn't know in this presentation whether I should have done this at the beginning or at the end, but I chose kind of to do it at the end because there's a big misconception, I think, with the Border Patrol. You know, a lot of people think it has to do with immigration, which it does, and narcotics smuggling, and it does. But the Border Patrol and Customs and a lot of other agencies, as you all know, when 9/11 hit, which to me hits me very close to my heart. I'm very American at heart, so to speak. And when 9/11 occurred, you know, several months later, the government decided to reorganize and make the Department of Homeland Security, where the Border Patrol used to be under the Department of Justice. And so our main focus since 9/11 and since that restructuring of these agencies under the Department of Homeland Security and Customs and Border Patrol is to prevent terrorists and terrorist weapons from making entry into this country. And so that's our number one focus as an agency. And of course, you know, we do deal with the human smuggling and trafficking, and also that the illicit narcotics making entry. But you know, for the most part, we've been very adamant about that, and a lot of our training has focused in on especially in reference to the intelligence department, which I work. We've been very focused on that. I think that's our number one priority since the restructuring, and so a lot of our current training focuses in on that to try and pinpoint that and prevent something like that happening, you know, in the future. And pretty much that's all I got.
Good evening. My name is Edna Reyes. I was born in Teniente Juan de la Tarrera, Sonora, Mexico, but I was basically raised here in Deming, New Mexico since I was 7. I graduated in 2008 from Deming High School, and in 2012 I graduated here from Western with a bachelor's in criminal justice. Then in 2014 I got my master's in interdisciplinary studies, and now I'm going to law school. My second year now. I'm actually really nervous and excited to start my second year. Right now I'm interning for Judge Delaney in Deming. I'm actually very excited about that too. Let's see. I was 7 years old when my mother decided to crossed the border with us. 4 kids. I believe 11, 9, 7, and my sister was like 2. We crossed through Palomas to Columbus, and after 15 to 16 years, I wasn't able to go to Mexico, and I really couldn't understand why, but it was something. After that, I became a U.S. citizen in 2012, and every time I'm encountered into going into like a leadership position or opportunity that comes out, I'm usually the minority. I'm the Hispanic woman, and it's kind of sad to see that there's not a lot of me's out there or other Mexicans out there. But it makes me realize that I'm lucky. I'm lucky to be here, and I'm lucky to have my parents that educated me and that taught me to be hardworking. I remember working in the fields up to actually when I was doing my master's, I was still trying to work till I can get money to, just try to finish my education. Now I know I'm going to be in a lot of debt, but that's the least of my worries, right? It should be. I don't know. I'm honestly humbled to be able to have so many people around me that support me and that have helped me be where I'm at right now. Dr. Ortego, Dr. Manzanares, Mr. Warren, a lot of friends. I want to make a change, to make a change, and I know everybody wants to do that, but I feel like we need more Hispanics fighting with me to make a change, and whatever it is. I honestly don't know what I want to do. My parents think I should do immigration, of course, but I kind of want to do government or international law, or which kind of links back to immigration some way or another. I'm really involved. I made a list of things I'm doing right now. So I'm the Lieutenant Governor for the 8th Circuit, so I'm the Diversity Chair for that. I'm an ambassador for Washburn University. By the way, that's where I go, sorry, it's in Kansas. I'm the Vice President for the WSBA there, and I'm the Vice President for HALSA, which stands for Hispanic American Law Student Association. I'm an ambassador for LexisNexis, which is a database we use for research. Basically, I interpret for the clinic, and most of the cases I do are regarding immigration cases, and that's all I do. I'm gonna do more, but so I mean that's all.
It's heartwarming to hear to have young people interested in helping others. So I am the district attorney, Francesca Esteves. And I was asked to speak here. I'm not sure exactly what to speak about because the state prosecutor's office, we don't do any immigration work. But we do have, finally in the state of New Mexico, a human trafficking statute, which Maria Sanchez Gagne, I'm not sure if she's with the Attorney General's office, she lobbied for that for years. And we have used that to prosecute cases of its exploitation, bringing in people to work and not get paid, and it's slavery. It's really modern day slavery, and of course we all know about the sex slaves, a huge industry, I should say. So what I thought I would just touch on is this country was founded by, built by immigrants. I mean, most of the people here are not Native Americans. The majority of the people in the United States have ancestry from other parts of the world, either brought here freely or in servitude. So I always remind myself that when I hear bigotry or hatred, you know, where did your grandfather come from? You know, did you look at yourself in the mirror? So I think we do have a great country, and I also am proud to be an American. I went around the world in different countries, and I think we have a great system, potential. And we have to remind ourselves to fight for that, especially after the events that happened yesterday, last night, in South Carolina. So we have a legacy that we have to change. I don't know how to change a person's heart. That's the hardest thing to do. So I started out as a legal services attorney because I wanted to help, and I grew up in New York, and I was housing into taking over abandoned buildings and squatting them and getting tenants and rehab them and so forth. And I went to court, and nobody spoke English except for me because I was the young person. And they told me I couldn't interpret because I was just a student and I wasn't an interpreter. And so I had a whole 30 tenants, who couldn't articulate their rights, and we didn't have an attorney. We just went on a rent strike and went to court because they wanted to evict everybody. And that's when I said, I'll be back. So, legal services is a great profession. I started with the Legal Services Corporation, which, funny enough, Richard Nixon signed into law. And that funds free legal services for indigent people in the United States. So if you have consumer problems, education problems, up until recently, the LSC, Legal Services Corporation, prohibited advocating for undocumented workers, and there's been some ways that we've gotten around that. I'm on the board of New Mexico Legal Services. And I never thought I'd be a prosecutor. That's all I wanted to do was help people. And anyway, I came here because my parents were here, so in 1991 I came with my family. So our immigration laws have been very interesting. My opinion is that the history of immigration laws has been always to make sure that there is a pool of cheap labor. And I think history bears that out with the horrific anti-Asian laws. I wasn't taught any of that in school. I got books after I graduated, started to read, and I'm like, oh my God. Every group was discriminated against who came over. Of course, the Native Americans were decimated. But, so that's why I say this country is founded by immigrant labor, sudor y sangre. So the district attorney's office doesn't really touch immigration laws. We prosecute crimes that our legislature has defined, conduct that is criminal. And however, there are some great strides I think the state of New Mexico has made, including our human trafficking statute. And there are ways to allow the most exploited people who are forced to come over because they have no food, they have no place to live, and they have to endure such horrific work conditions as slaves. So if a person is trafficked and a prosecutor finds out, law enforcement officer, there is federal assistance available, including what's called a T-visa. And it's not a path to citizenship, my understanding. Again, I'm not an expert, but there are agencies, the Catholic Diocese and other agencies that specialize in helping trafficking victims get to safety, and they get a work permit and so forth. And then we also have what's called a U visa, which can lead to a legal residency. That's for victims of domestic violence. And that was I like to remind people that the VAWA was passed in 1995. Who was president then?
Clinton.
Actually, it was a Republican majority in the Congress. Yeah, it was Clinton. But that law, so I think we can work bipartisan, and that's my point, has been extended to protect immigrants who are in this country who are exploited by crimes of domestic violence. Our Constitution says that anyone in the borders of the United States have to have due process of law, and all of our federal rights presumptively apply to people within our borders. But we've seen different things happening over the past couple of decades. In 1952, I think it was the biggest reorganization of the Immigration Nationality Act, and I can't really speak on the specifics, but I looked some of the history of 1986, and I was in New York in legal services when this came in. IRCA, it was called Immigration Reform and Control Act, and what was going on is they didn't have people to work in the field. And so there was an amnesty program. So it was very specifically geared towards securing labor. Because the myth is that immigrants, oh, I have 2 minutes, okay. Immigrants are taking our jobs. 3 minutes? Okay, I see you have my glasses. And I think that's somewhat of a myth. You could play statistics both sides. So in terms of what laws does New Mexico have? So the Supreme Court has pretty consistently of the United States held that immigration law is in the federal domain. So it is not something that state law can regulate. And everybody knows that, I don't know where they get all their money, the state of Arizona, but Sheriff Arpaio decided to, with his HB 1070, Arizona started to erode that concept and passed this law which encroached on the federal jurisdiction. And it went up to the United States Supreme Court after a while in 2012. It's called Arizona versus United States. And they struck down three provisions of that Arizona law, and I can't tell you what all the other provisions are, but the three provisions which that sheriff wanted to have as part of Arizona law was they could, they made it a crime, a state crime, if you were here without documentation. And the court said no. That is, our Supreme Court said no, that's part of the federal governance. They also made it a crime to look for work. And again, that was held to be in violation of the United States Fourth Amendment and due process, 14th Amendment due process clause. And then they wanted to, they had a section of their law, state law, which they could arrest without a warrant if they thought the legal resident was committing a deportable act. So there's certain legal acts, once you gain legal permanent residency, that you can be deported for and stripped of that privilege of being a permanent resident, such as DWI, crimes of moral turpitude, kidnapping, rape, incest, and also domestic violence. So the Supreme Court has taken a stand, but I think there's room in okay, I have 1 minute. The GOP thinks there's room to challenge this, so I'm sure we're going to be facing a lot of challenges. New Mexico has a few laws where we are mandated, for example, if someone is arrested, any person arrested for a felony has to be fingerprinted and put through a database system, including a federal database system, so there's a cross-check to see if a person is here legally. And if they're not, Border Patrol is called and they are deported. So that is a state law. Also, there's a recent New Mexico Supreme Court case, and New Mexico is a very progressive state in some people's view, and in May of 2015, State of New Mexico versus Sanchez, a woman was coming through at the international border in Santa Rosa, I think, right, the New Mexico border with the United States. And she was pulled over, and long story short, she had a load of marijuana. And the court, for the first time, defined international border doesn't protect someone from that type of seizure. And I think, I agree with that decision. I think a lot of people don't. Is that to shut up? Okay, thank you. No, that's, you have to do your job. Oh. Okay, I can ramble, so.
Well, I think now we have a decent amount of time to open it up for questions for our panelists. And if any of you want to add anything.
very, I applaud the federal government for allowing that. So we have mostly women who come over and are exploited, and if they cooperate with law enforcement, they get a U visa and a work permit if they are a victim of domestic violence. And there's different paths. I'm not the expert, but I have worked with a lot of families who have used that and are here, productive, working, tax-paying citizens. I mean, they may not be citizens yet, but they are tax-paying. And the T visa, again, it doesn't lead necessarily to citizenship or residency, but it is necessary to try to stop the exploitation of children, women, and poor people who are bound to come and work in your restaurants. And then if you notice, they won't be there in a couple of weeks. And it's pretty frightening. And that nice note, I'll just end.
We have Dr. White and Dr. Tatum.
I have a question for, is it on? Okay. I have a question for Francesca. What's the status of the 14th Amendment in terms of anchor babies? Is that in peril?
I am not a constitutional expert.
Oh.
So I could defer to perhaps yourself, who might know. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but,
I
anchor
practice
babies.
mostly state law.
I was an anchor baby.
Okay. And again, when I was asked to speak here, well, I really don't have an expertise in immigration law. So, I can't answer that question.
Define anchor baby.
I think one of the things that when they reference anchor babies is when these children that are born in the United States from Mexican or other people from other countries, they come into the United States to have their children here, and that automatically makes those children American citizens, and so that's kind of what that
It anchors
little
the
term.
parents.
Yeah.
Parents can then, and I'm not sure what the immigration law is, but it used to be a way to have children petition for their parents.
Dr. White had
This question is for Mr. Murillo.
Yes, sir.
And you said your number one focus is on prevention of terrorism.
Yes, sir.
Can you give me a sense for the focus in terms of either individuals coming over or materials coming over? If I could be clear, just would the most likely scenario be for terrorists to come across unencumbered, or is the more likely scenario to come over with some sort of equipment or weapons?
Well, I think there's certain aspects that I'm not at liberty to talk about in reference to information regarding terrorists and terrorist weapons making entry into the country. What I can tell you is that I think that specific threat is always looking for a different avenue, knowing that we're kind of shutting the doors in specific areas. Now, like I said, in reference to scenarios or events that have occurred, I really couldn't talk about them. What I could tell you is that, any information, if you read the 9/11 Commission, I don't know if you've ever read the 9/11 Commission. I went to some training a couple of years back, and one of the biggest things was to read that 9/11 Commission. And I think, we saw a lot of the issues when it came to either the ports of entry, which, again, I work between the ports of entry. One of the things, I guess there's a misconception that Customs and Border Patrol are kind of one and the same. Customs, Office of Field Operations, is pretty much focused at the port of entry, where the United States Border Patrol focuses entries between the borders. And so, in reading that 9/11 Commission and what the government did is they realized what happened at the ports of entry and along the U.S.-Mexico border between the ports. And so they had to go out there and reorganize everything and kind of put that focus on us, because we're technically, you know, other than those agencies that are working outside of the country, we're the first line of defense at our borders. And so, you know, what I can tell you is any information that does relate to terrorism is relayed immediately, whether it's through apprehensions that we have and individuals that they're specifically looking into, you know, through information sharing between different agencies. And so again, like I said, I can't get into specifics in reference to threats, recent threats or any threats at that matter, but I know that in those threats, that information gets immediately passed on to us, and so we go ahead and do what we have to do on our part, whether it's debriefing or interviewing any subjects of interest, or looking into you know, certain areas that are of possible vulnerability at the borders.
Agent Murillo, could you say in the time that you've been in Lordsburg, that's what, 5 years?
About 6.5, because I did about four months of training in
Uh-huh.
Artesia, New Mexico.
What percentage of your time would you say has been, of the total, devoted to terrorism as opposed to human trafficking, drugs, other material?
Well, like I said, our main focus is, you know, terrorism. And so I can tell you that 100% of the time we're focused in on trying to determine whether there's a threat. Now, when you talk about, you know, what percent of the time that we focus in on this and what the outcome is in reference to individuals that make entry, narcotics, so on and so forth. Up to this point in my career, you know, it's been very limited. It's been very limited, but we all know that even the smallest threat, you know, one individual getting through, you know, between the ports is enough to cause, you know, maximum damage in, you know, in the United States. I think to all of us there in the Border Patrol, any life that's at risk, any American citizen that's at risk, you know, is not good enough for us. We need to protect the United States, you know, as best we can and to the fullest.
Oh, sorry. Who's going?
My name's Eddie Madrid, and I guess the question can be asked to this gentleman over here that just was speaking.
Yes, sir.
I don't know exactly how to ask this question, but percentage-wise and everything, 9/11,
Yes, sir.
how did those terrorists enter the United States? You can go way back, and they could have come in through airplane or whatever from other countries. Canada, there's other borders, right? And
Yes, sir.
you're focusing on the southern borders here.
Yes, sir.
Okay, percentage-wise, how many terrorists would you think? I know we got a drug problem,
Yes, sir.
but terrorism comes through Mexico versus Canada and all the other sources that we have that are coming in.
So your question is reference to how many of these? Are you asking about 9/11 specific? You asked about 9/11
Well,
specifically. The first part of the
9/11
question.
or what
And
is
how
the big,
those-
is there a big threat, overwhelming threat coming through Mexico? Or could this be coming in through Canada or other entrants, you know, I guess that's.
Well, to answer the first part of your question, I think the 9/11 Commission, that book that went out, that report actually that went out, was very clear in reference to how a lot of these terrorists came into the country. And one of the biggest things was through student visas, where a lot of these individuals made entry through the ports of entry, trying to use these student visas, to come out and study. But obviously they had their mindset to what they were doing. I think a couple of them, went to flight schools in Arizona, Scottsdale, some in Florida. And so, from my understanding, from what I recall, that's one of the main ways they got into the United States, into the country. To answer the second part of your question, I think the Border Patrol in itself, and I think the Department of Homeland Security wants to be proactive. There's always a threat, there's always threats coming in on a daily basis in reference to, information that they gather the intelligence departments. But we want to be proactive at this point. I think it's not good enough to, in my personal opinion, I don't think it's good enough to wait for something like this to happen again. And so the Department of Homeland Security, the NSA, and a lot of other agencies, we're all very proactive in trying to eliminate any options for these individuals to come in, especially organizations like, as we all know, the ISIS. And so again, like I said, the government's very proactive in trying to find any vulnerabilities to begin with before they do. And so, again, the Border Patrol, like I said, with information sharing with other agencies, whether it's in the northern border or whether it's in the southwest border or ports of entries, in Florida, along the coastlines, California, we're very proactive in trying to figure out, where our vulnerabilities are, and if there are any threats, acting accordingly and reacting very, very quickly to that, which is in our new Border Patrol strategy, integrate information, getting the information, integrating ourselves into the community and as an agency, and then rapidly responding based on those two.
I understand that. It also gives me great privilege to see this young lady here that came over with her parents and everything, and now look at her. She's really successful here, and we got a lot of those coming in from over there. Some of them, their parents are getting deported back or would like to get their parents deported back. They went and fought for our country, their kids. They were born here, they're United States citizens.
Yes, sir.
I think that gives me a good feeling to see her doing that, coming here and speaking.
Oh, of course.
And I congratulate her. Thank you.
Okay, so my question is, what type of threat do you think immigrants who only come here to the U.S. just to work, what type of threat do they have to the U.S.?
I think there's two aspects to that question. Number one is when it comes to the laws in the United States, I don't think there's any leeway to say that, I don't think that plays a part. I think, the laws are very clear, and if you make entry without inspection, it's illegal in the country. And so somebody has to uphold that law, no matter how significant or insignificant the threat is. That's the United States law. You understand what I'm saying? Now, in reference to my own personal view now, I understand that many of these people are coming into the United States to try and find work, which is, I understand that. I come from, I'm the first generation, I'm from a generation that where my own grandparents came into the country, and you know, they came in to work in the fields, and they would go back to Mexico. My father was actually born in Ciudad Juarez, Mexico, became a United States citizen. My mother was born in Chihuahua, and she became a United States citizen through my father. My father was in the Army for several years. And so, in my personal view, I understand, you know, the need. But I think there needs to be some sort of regulation, because there's a lot of other things that go with it. You know, our welfare system is affected by illegal immigration. Our justice system is overwhelmed by illegal immigration, issues with illegal immigration. You know, it goes beyond that. But again, that's for the politicians to decide, and obviously the American people have a lot to say in that. And you know, as a Border Patrol agent, we're there to uphold that law, and we'll do it, you know, no matter what. It really doesn't matter how significant or insignificant the threat is. That's just our job. Now, in my own personal view, like I said, you know, there's got to be a lot of changes, but you know, it's very difficult. It's a very touchy situation.
Hi, my name is Eric Wright. Sorry, I apologize. I came in late, so I missed most of your talk. Is it Madrid?
Murillo.
Murillo.
Yes, sir.
Okay. It seems like you've stated that your main goal is prevention of terrorism.
Yes, sir.
And it seems like several folks here in the audience are also concerned with that specifically. Before I ask my real question, you know, I would state that, you know, I see terrorism defined as the creation of terror or the sport of terror around the world. And I would like to point out, as many know, there's a very chaotic situation in Mexico, or in distinct parts of Mexico, where we have, you know, violence with 97% impunity purveyed by both organized crime and the Mexican federal government, which in many cases is intricately involved at every level with the organized crime in Mexico. And here in our country, we're sending billions of dollars every year in military aid to the Mexican government. I would just put it out there, is that not support of terrorism in a way? But my real question is, I'd like to have you comment, if you would, on the case of Sergio Hernandez, who was a teenager killed in Ciudad Juarez, about 20 feet from our border, just on the other side of the river, by a Border Patrol agent who was standing on U.S. soil, albeit maybe 2 or 3 feet, but on U.S. soil. The claim was that a group of teenagers was throwing rocks. A witness video shows otherwise, and Border Patrol has refused to release their security camera videos on the case, so we don't know what those cameras showed. And Sergio Hernandez was also hit in the back a few times with bullets. There's another case in Nogales, which happened a couple of years later. I forget the name of the kid, but he was also shot by a Border Patrol agent standing on U.S. soil. The family tried several avenues of legal action, trying to take the Border Patrol to court on the case. And as far as I know so far, the findings have always been the crime happened in Mexico. You cannot try you know, a U.S. citizen for a crime that happened in Mexico when they were not in Mexico. I argue the crime happened in the U.S. when the trigger was pulled. Anyway, it seems like we're moving in the direction where Border Patrol agents will be able to kill people standing outside of our borders with impunity. In my view, another form of terrorism. I was wondering if you would like to comment on how you see that legally, and also if any of the attorneys would like to comment on that.
Well, what I can tell you, I really can't talk about that specific situation. I'm not at liberty to talk about situations of that nature. What I can tell you is that you know, law enforcement in itself, I think we've seen it over the last couple of months, maybe a year, where law enforcement is being targeted in reference to the use of force, okay? And there's a very, we're trained, at least the Border Patrol is trained to react a certain way in certain situations. And so I'll tell you about a little incident that I had in Nogales when I was deployed for 90 days. I don't even think I told my wife since she's here. But when I was in Nogales, you know, you have to be quick to react because individuals cross the border very, very quickly. And within 10, 15 seconds, you're pretty much in a foot chase to catch these people. If not, they get into the city and you know, they're gone. You really, they blend in real quick. And I was trying to explain the situation to my father too, you know, in conversations that we were having, but, and I ask you and everybody here, out here, kind of to put yourself in the situation. And we've been trained to react, to act in certain situations, and every situation is different, is what I can tell you. Every single situation, every time I've encountered, whether it's subjects being smuggled into the United States and their foot guides, or narcotic smugglers, mules, or vehicles, you know, every situation is different and you react differently. In this situation in Nogales, an individual crossed the border and they advised me that he was crossing. And as he's crossing the border, I get out my vehicle as quickly as I can, and I kind of jump at him, and he starts trying to go back south. And we get into a little scuffle. Now, I'm gonna be quite honest with you. You know, I'm not that big of a guy, okay? And this guy was a little bit bigger than I was, and so, you know, we were going at it pretty good. And all of a sudden, I'm getting rocked, and I don't know that I'm getting rocked. But my vehicle is getting hit by boulders, I mean, good-sized rocks. And I can just hear chaos break out, but at this point, I'm just focused on trying to get this guy. Until somebody tells me that I'm getting rocked, and you know, my training through the Border Patrol is you have to protect yourself. To stop that threat. Now, it's my perception on how significant that threat is, okay? Now, you know, and believe me, I'm not trying to kind of turn this around, but you know, if this is your wife, or you know, I told my wife this, and I told my father this. When you have somebody that has a rock, even a rock, a good-sized rock, and he hits you across the head, what type of damage can that cause? You can lose an eye, you can die from it, you know, as significant as losing your own life or losing, you know, vision, so on and so forth. And so, what I can tell you is, every agent, just depending, and for the most part, law enforcement officers, depending on the threat, there's a lot of factors that go into that. And I think, for the most part, all of us have that in our mind. If you can kind of understand what I'm saying, we kind of react based on that threat that comes to us. You know, I can't tell you what specifically happened there in Juarez. I've seen, you know, what's been put out, but again, that's all under investigation, or was under investigation, and so there was you know, a final outcome to that. You know, it's unfortunate that it has to get to that point. You know, where there's lives lost, but there's a lot of other aspects to it than just you know, as simple as sometimes the media puts it. I think a lot more information that you know, kind of plays its part. If that kind of answers your question, if I can. that's kind of the best way I can answer your question.
There were a couple hands I saw, and now they're yellow. So, oh, okay.
Who do you want to?
What's this?
Hi, this is for Edna. What has been your struggle or challenges coming here as an illegal and then now accomplish all this, because it's an accomplishment, a big one. How has it been for you? Has it been hard, or what can you tell me about that?
Well, it's been hard economically. You know, the money's always an issue, but my parents are field workers, so you just have to work harder than everyone else. You have to work twice or 3 times as hard as everyone. My English and my writing is not that great, or now I'm improving a lot. But, you know, it doesn't come natural, it doesn't come easy. So, I always tell, everyone tells me, oh, you're so smart. And I say, I'm not smart, I just work really hard, really, really hard. So people might think, you know, maybe that's a smart way to do it, but the hardest part is honestly just looking around and realizing that other people are not doing the same, or they're not trying to strive, or like, maybe it's not because they don't want to, but it's because there's no money, which is the issue. I think that's the biggest issue, because the support, I have it all, thank God, from peers, from my parents, mentors. So, you know, either work hard, like working, or work hard and studying too. That's the biggest issue.
Thanks. This is a question again for the Border Patrol. I have realized that I need to understand better the relationship between the Border Patrol and ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, specifically in the case of somebody who has been told, say that, okay, you have exhausted all your legal avenues and has been served with papers saying you are going to be deported, someone who's here illegally. And because I received emails from Interfaith Immigration National Organization saying, please call ICE and ask that so-and-so not be deported. This person is a good member of our society, has been here many years, has a family, etc. But at that point, is ICE even involved? Or is it in the hands of the Border Patrol? And do you need to communicate with ICE if you come in contact with that individual, or how does that work?
I know that the Border Patrol isn't involved in that process. It would probably have to be with HSI and their deportation officers that pretty much are in charge of those specific cases. Now, again, this is not the Border Patrol speaking. In my personal view, I think the biggest thing that I've seen is individuals who are in this country and have no knowledge of what the immigration law, or what the immigration laws are, or what they can do, you know, in order to get that process going. There's a lack of information, and I really don't know where that disconnect is. But, you know, there's been situations where we've apprehended individuals and they're somewhat successful in Mexico. You know, they own their own businesses, properties, and they come into the United States illegally and get deported. And one of the biggest questions that I ask is, why didn't you just go to the port of entry and try and ask for, you know, permission to come into the United States, go through the process? And they're like, well, I don't know how to do it, or I don't know, you know, what it is that they require. And so I think, you know, even with those that are in the country and are in that process of, you know, their case being worked out, again, you know, every case is different. You know, I don't work in that specific area. Again, that's probably an HSI deportation officer. You know, that's what they work at. But you know, I from what I've seen, a lot of the times it's information that they don't have available to them, or lack of, you know, knowing what it is, the process is. But ultimately, you know, in situations like that, I know that they get processed, and you know, the judge has that final say on what comes out of it. But again, you could be facing a situation where domestic violence, you know, where an illegal undocumented subject was faced with a domestic violence situation, a DUI situation, different situations. So again, every situation is different, and so they deal with that.
But you don't do deportations at all?
No, we don't do deportation. We just detain those at the border, and then again, we process them there at our station, and then we send them over to you know, the court system, and they handle it from there. Now, if there's a specific case where, you know, for example, there was some sort of, again, domestic violence situation, or not domestic violence, but how can I put it, human trafficking, for example, that we knew somebody was getting smuggled into the country or trafficked into the country, you know, for a certain purpose, then we present that case, and then of course that case takes precedence over just somebody who was just coming into the country illegally, and we present that way, you know, to the courts systems, and again, they deal with that.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, but don't worry, we have refreshments, and I hope we'll continue the conversation out.
And it has to be a quick question. Library, we're in summer hours, so the library's gonna close in an hour. We wanna give you plenty of chance to eat. So very quick question.
You don't ask.
And it has to be a question, okay?
Thank you for sharing. I'm sorry that I was late and didn't get to hear all of you earlier. But a question that comes to my mind is that largely the issue of, quote, illegal immigration is simply one where human existence is made illegal. In the aftermath of NAFTA, in what we are looking at now with regard to TPP, maybe you will be trying to get over the border to Canada or somewhere else if economic conditions worsen. Yes. So what awareness or training do you have with regard to why these people are coming here?
That's not my specific department. I know there is a department within the Border Patrol that focuses in on that. What exactly brings them over to the United States? I mean, for the most part, the majority, I can say 99.9% of the people that come to the United States is because in their countries, you know, the economy's not that great. They can't provide for their families, and so they're coming here to the United States to try and fulfill that. And so, you know, for the most part, like I said, that's kind of what we're dealing with. A very limited number of people come here to kind of reunite with their family members. But of course, it all leads to, you know, going back to settling in and working and providing for their families here in the United States.
Why don't we thank our panelists, and then we can continue the conversation